My earliest memories are painted with shadows, not the soft, comforting kind that dance on bedroom walls at night, but the heavy kind that follow you even in daylight, shadows cast by someone else's spotlight. My name is Clara Whitmore, the eldest daughter of Eleanor and Charles Whitmore. From the day my sister Lydia was born, she became the star of our household. Everything revolved around her, the lullabies, the birthday parties, the endless applause at school recitals. I was always nearby, holding the camera, carrying the extra bags, clapping politely while no one looked at me long enough to notice whether I was smiling. It wasn't that I was unloved exactly. My parents provided food, clothes, and the occasional pat on the shoulder, but true affection, the kind that lights you up inside, was rationed, and Lydia got the larger share every time. I still remember my 12th birthday. I had invited a few classmates, baked cupcakes from a boxed mix, and waited eagerly for my parents to appear with candles. Instead, they came bustling into the kitchen with Lydia trailing behind in her new tutu. "Sorry, sweetheart," my mother said absent-mindedly. "Lydia has a recital. We can't be late." The cupcakes sat untouched on the counter as they left, and I blew out my candles alone. That was the pattern of my childhood. Big days that were supposed to belong to me, quietly stolen by my younger sister. My science fair ribbon got buried under Lydia's dance trophies. My straight A's were met with a quick, "good job," before my parents turned to gush over Lydia's natural talent. Even family photos told the story. Lydia in the center, radiant and adored. Me on the side, half smiling, half fading. By the time I was a teenager, I had learned how to survive invisibility. I threw myself into books, into quiet ambition, into the idea that if I just worked hard enough, someday someone would notice. My friends would ask, "Doesn't it bother you?" And I'd shrug like it was nothing. But at night, staring at the ceiling, I would ache for even one day where I wasn't the background to someone else's story. I didn't know it then, but those years of neglect were forging something sharp inside me. A determination that one day I wouldn't just be seen, I would shine. As I grew older, the shadows didn't fade. They only stretched longer. By the time I was a teenager, I could predict exactly how every family moment would play out. If there was a choice to be made, Lydia would be chosen. If there was applause to be given, Lydia would receive it. And if I had accomplished something worth celebrating, it would be quietly brushed aside so she could take center stage. I still remember the night of my high school awards ceremony. I had worked harder than ever that year, pushing myself until my nights blurred into mornings, fueled by determination that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment my parents finally saw me. When my name was called as valedictorian, my heart raced. I looked toward the back of the auditorium, searching for Eleanor and Charles. I wanted to see pride on their faces, to feel even a flicker of recognition. But they weren't there. They were across town, watching Lydia perform in her community theater debut. Later, when I told them about my award, my father smiled faintly and said, "Well, you've always been the responsible one, Clara. We knew you'd do well." No congratulations, no hug, just a flat acknowledgement, as if achievement from me was expected and therefore not worth notice. Lydia, on the other hand, received standing ovations even for the smallest roles. A single pirouette earned her flowers, photos, and endless praise. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that someday I would build something so undeniable that they couldn't ignore me. College came, and with it, independence. I studied relentlessly, built internships, and scraped together scholarships. When I walked across the stage to collect my degree in economics, the applause from strangers felt louder than any silence my family had ever given me. They didn't even attend the ceremony. They sent a congratulatory text instead, explaining that Lydia had a bridal shower to attend. It was always Lydia. Every milestone of mine, big or small, was overshadowed by her endless orbit of attention. At first, I thought the pain of being unseen might dull with age, that I would grow used to invisibility, But it didn't dull, it hardened. It taught me to stop expecting applause from people who had already decided I wasn't worth it. And somewhere in the quiet between being ignored and being underestimated, I began to make a silent promise to myself. I would never again beg for a seat at a table that refused to set a place for me. By the time I stepped into adulthood, I had stopped waiting for invitations that never came. My parents' approval was a door forever closed, so I turned away and began constructing my own house, brick by brick, with no blueprint but determination. I worked long hours, juggling classes with part-time jobs, pouring every ounce of energy into proving, not to them anymore, but to myself, that I was capable of more than invisibility. My friends from college often joked that I was married to ambition, but they didn't know the truth. Ambition was the only companion that never ignored me. It was during one of those exhausting years, working at an investment firm's internship, that I met Adrian Kane. He was nothing like the men I'd known before. Confident, yes, but never arrogant. Sharp, but warm. He had a way of making people feel seen, not as stepping stones, but as equals. At first, I kept my guard up, convinced his attention was a fluke. Men like him weren't supposed to notice women like me, women trained to be invisible. But Adrian noticed everything. He noticed the way I held my pen when I was nervous, how I stayed late, not because I had to, but because I refused to fail, how I asked thoughtful questions when others were too afraid. When he invited me for coffee one evening after work, I expected polite conversation. Instead, I found myself laughing in a way I hadn't since childhood. One coffee became dinners. Dinners turned into long walks where I told him about my family. Not the sugar-coated version, but the reality of always being second best. I expected pity, but he gave me something else: respect. "Clara," he told me one night, "they may not have seen you, but I do. And I think the world should too." It wasn't just his words. Adrian came from a family that redefined love for me. His parents, Victor and Margaret Kane, welcomed me into their home with open arms. Margaret hugged me the first time we met, as though she'd known me forever. Victor asked about my dreams and listened, really listened, without interrupting or shifting the subject to someone else. Sitting at their dinner table, I felt a warmth I had never known in my own home. With Adrian, I learned what it felt like to shine without stealing light from anyone else. He celebrated my wins, pushed me to chase goals I'd once been too timid to name, and reminded me that invisibility was never my destiny. It was only the role my family had cast me in. When he slipped a ring onto my finger on a quiet evening overlooking the city skyline, I didn't just say yes to him. I said yes to a new chapter, one where I would never again be asked to vanish. I didn't know then that my engagement would become the trigger for Lydia's cruelest betrayal yet. When Adrian slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt like my life had finally shifted into its rightful lane. For once, the applause was real, and it was for me, not borrowed, not stolen, not redirected to someone else, mine. The night we announced our engagement, Adrian's parents, Victor and Margaret, threw a small dinner at their home. The table was set with candles, flowers, and laughter that filled the air like music. Margaret toasted to a future of partnership, not possession. And Victor clasped Adrian's shoulder with pride. In that moment, I felt a kind of belonging I had never known. A family where my presence wasn't tolerated, it was celebrated. And then came the inevitable storm. When I called my parents to share the news, Eleanor's voice was flat. "That's nice, Clara," she said, distracted, as though I'd told her the weather forecast. My father, Charles, asked, "Is Lydia invited to the dinner, not 'Are you happy?' or 'When's the date?'" The sharp edge in his tone made it clear that even my engagement had to orbit around my sister. As for Lydia, her reaction was sharper still. She didn't congratulate me. Instead, she posted a picture of herself on social media that same evening, flashing a cocktail in a glittering dress, captioned, "When one door closes, another opens." My turn, I shouldn't have been surprised. Lydia had always turned my milestones into her shadows, then claimed the spotlight for herself. But the engagement made her envy sharper, more dangerous. She started dropping barbed comments whenever we crossed paths. "Don't let Adrian get bored of your seriousness," she'd say, with a smile that wasn't a smile. Or, "It must be exhausting pretending to fit in with his world." I tried to brush it off, telling myself she couldn't tarnish what Adrian and I had. But a small knot of fear tightened in my chest. Lydia wasn't just jealous, she was plotting. I could see it in the way she studied me, like she was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. At family dinners, the divide grew starker. My parents hung on Lydia's every word, while Adrian would reach under the table, squeeze my hand, and ground me. "You don't need their approval," he whispered once, as Eleanor prattled on about Lydia's glowing future. But deep down, some wounded part of me still longed for it. Then one afternoon, an invitation arrived in the mail. A wedding invitation. Lydia's wedding. I stared at the gold lettering, the embossed roses curling along the edges, the date written clearly across the center. My eyes searched every line, every flourish, desperate for my name among the invited. It wasn't there, not invited, not even acknowledged. I felt my chest constrict, the paper cutting into my fingers as though it were a blade. This wasn't forgetfulness. It wasn't oversight. This was deliberate. Lydia had made her choice, and my parents, by their silence, had made theirs. The envelope was heavy, the kind of paper that promises importance. Gold foil curled around the edges like vines, and a wax seal pressed with an L gleamed at the flap. I knew before I opened it that it was Lydia's. I also knew, somewhere between my collarbone and my stomach, that it wasn't meant for me. Inside, roses etched into cream, the script loud with perfection. Lydia Whitmore and Daniel Hartley invite you. The date, the venue, the dress code, a line about an intimate ceremony surrounded by our closest circle. I scanned for my name as if it might be hiding between flourishes. It wasn't there. I tried the RSVP link anyway, fingers shaking over the keyboard. The website greeted me with a polite error. "This email address is not on the guest list." I tried my work email, the old college address I barely used. Not on the guest list. Not on the guest list. The screen blurred. I blinked hard. The taste in my mouth was coppery, like I'd bitten my own tongue. When I could breathe again, I called my mother. Eleanor answered on the second ring, the soundtrack of clinking dishes in the background. "Sweetheart, I was just thinking of you." "Am I invited to Lydia's wedding?" I asked. Voice flat enough to hold shape. The pause was brief, practiced. "It's a very small affair, darling. You know how venues are. Limited capacity, it's nothing personal." Nothing personal. The words landed like a door closing without a sound. "You're her sister," I said. "I'm her sister." Another pause, longer. "Lydia's been under a lot of stress. There were concerns about drama. She wanted a peaceful day." "Drama," I repeated. "You mean me, the person you raised to be quiet enough to disappear." Eleanor sighed, the kind meant to end a conversation. "We can arrange a family brunch after the honeymoon, just us. It will be lovely, no pressure, no crowds. No witnesses," I thought. No record. I hung up before my voice could break and called my father. Charles didn't bother with pleasantries. "Clara, let's be practical. Weddings are logistics. This isn't the hill to die on." "I'm not dying," I said. "I'm asking if my family believes I exist." "You're always so intense," he said. And in the background I heard Lydia laugh at something, the sound traveling through walls like a habit. "Don't make this about you. It was about me. That was the point. It had never been." I set the invitation on the counter and stared at the curve of my sister's name until the letters stopped looking like language. Adrian found me there minutes later, keys still in his hand, eyes taking in the scene the way he takes in a market crash, quietly, completely. "Talk to me," he said. "They cut me out," I managed. Officially, publicly, elegantly. He picked up the card, read it once, and set it down as if it were something fragile he refused to break for them. I'm sorry. It's ridiculous that I still want them to change, I said. That I still want to be picked. Adrian's thumb traced circles on my palm, a steadying metronome. Wanting is human, begging is optional. A message pinged my phone. Sophie, saw the post. Are you okay? What post? I typed back. She sent a screenshot from Lydia's Instagram. Lydia in white silk on a staircase, eyes lifted, captioned, keeping it intimate. No negativity, only love in the room. The comments were a choir of hearts, a few pointed notes, family only, and boundaries are everything. Lydia had liked those. Heat crawled up my neck. Not only exclusion, but the story preloaded. If I wasn't there, it was because I was negativity. Because boundaries. Sophie called immediately. Say the word and I'll torch the comments with truth. No, I said, throat tight. Not my game, not my fire. Then I'm coming over with fortified ice cream. Fortified? Don't ask. She arrived with 2 spoons and a face that made me feel less alone. We ate straight from the carton while Adrian poured tea to pretend we were civilized. When I showed them the RSVP error, Sophie swore softly and then gentled her voice like a hand on a bruise. You know this isn't about space, it's about control. I nodded. Somewhere deep, something clicked into place. I had begged for seats my whole life at tables set for one story. Lydia's. The wedding invitation was just the finest paper yet on an old message. The phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. Clara, it's Lydia. Please don't make this difficult. I want a drama-free day. You can come to the photos after if you wear something neutral and don't sit in the family rows. No +1, no speeches. My laugh startled even me. She wants me as scenery, I said, handing the phone to Adrian, a prop she can crop out. He read it, then looked up with a steadiness that made my lungs remember how to work. What do you want, Clara? Not what's fair, not what they'll permit. What do you want? The answer rose, clean and terrifying. I want to stop auditioning for people who never planned to give me the part. Sophie threw an arm around me. Good, now say it louder. I'm done, I said, a little stronger. No photos, no neutral dress, no back row. I won't attend a room that requires my absence to stay pretty. I typed and deleted again. Then finally sent Lydia 3 words. Enjoy your day. I blocked the number before I could change my mind. For a beat, the room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that follows an incision and precedes a stitch. Charles texted 20 minutes later, a bullet point list disguised as advice. Consider optics. Be the bigger person. Family remembers who supported whom on big days. Eleanor followed with a photo of a color palette. If you do come, choose something soft. Don't overshadow the bride. I turned the phone off and put it in a drawer like a knife I didn't want to hold. That night, I lay awake and watched city lights move across the ceiling like a tide. The hurt had layers, childhood disappointments stacked under adult ones, 1,000 small erasures under this decisive one. But underneath it all was a steadier feeling, unfamiliar and solid, a refusal that didn't need an audience. In the morning, Adrian brewed coffee and spread a map on the table, the kind with islands scattered like punctuation across blue. We don't have to sit home and pretend not to exist, he said lightly. If her day is about doors closing, let's find one that opens to the sea. I traced a coastline with my fingertip. Are you asking me to run away? I'm asking you to choose you, he said, on those exact dates, somewhere that reminds you your life is bigger than a guest list. Sophie, still in last night's sweatshirt, raised her mug in solemn approval. Say the word and I'll pack your SPF and an illegal amount of snacks. I didn't say yes, not yet. But I took a pen from the drawer, my own old ritual, and wrote a line on the back of Lydia's envelope before tucking it into a folder I labeled Keep. When someone builds a room that requires your silence, build a horizon instead. I set the folder on the shelf and felt something settle, like a picture finally hung straight. The date on Lydia's invitation glinted up from the counter, beautiful and irrelevant. The map on our table waited, patient as tide. I hadn't chosen the horizon yet, but I knew this much with painful, liberating clarity. I would not spend her wedding day proving I was worthy of a chair she never intended to set. The decision wasn't joy, not yet. It was dignity. And dignity, I was learning, is the kind of light you have to make yourself before the sun remembers you. You said the weeks leading up to Lydia's wedding were a study in silence. Invitations went out across town, glittering in gold script, and social media posts bloomed with hashtags about love, intimacy, and family. Not once did my name appear. Not in captions, not in whispered mentions, not even in the half-hearted phone calls my parents used to make before abandoning the subject altogether. But in my apartment, the silence wasn't heavy. It was purposeful. Adrian had turned it into planning. Spain? Italy? Or somewhere further east? He asked one evening, maps spread across the dining table. His eyes glittered with the same calm certainty that had steadied me when I thought I was drowning. Where do you want to be when your sister walks down the aisle without you? I hadn't realized until then that I had a choice. For most of my life, my role had been reactive, responding to neglect, swallowing disappointment, tiptoeing around Lydia's spotlight. But this time, I didn't have to sit at home pretending to be unaffected. I could choose to replace the ache with something new. I want sunlight, I said. Somewhere the air doesn't remind me of her. Adrian grinned. Then Greece it is. The decision was sealed with tickets booked and an itinerary so full of laughter it felt like defiance. Sophie, my best friend, squealed when I told her. Good, don't give them the satisfaction of your silence in that pew. Give yourself waves, wine, and a man who actually sees you. On the morning of Lydia's rehearsal dinner, Adrian and I boarded a plane. As the engines roared, I stared out at the shrinking city, its skyline glittering with memories that never gave me space. For the first time, leaving didn't feel like running. It felt like choosing. We arrived in Santorini as the sun slid into the Aegean, painting the horizon in ribbons of fire and rose. Adrian wrapped his arm around me on the balcony of our villa. And for a moment, I forgot Lydia entirely. The air smelled of salt and thyme, the sea stretched infinite, and laughter from nearby tavernas spilled into the night like music. This, Adrian whispered against my hair, is how you reclaim a day that was never meant for you. The next morning, while Lydia was posting filtered shots of her bridal brunch, I was barefoot on black volcanic sand, waves tugging at my ankles. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. For the first time, the horizon belonged to me. Adrian booked us a sailboat that afternoon. We drifted past whitewashed villages clinging to cliffs, the wind in my hair, his hand steady at my back. You've been holding your breath for years, he said softly. Exhale, Clara. This is your life now. And I did. For hours, I laughed without restraint, let the sea spray sting my face, and felt the weight of absence turn into something else. Presence, not theirs. Mine. Back home, the rehearsal dinner would be in full swing. Eleanor gushing over Lydia's gown, Charles rehearsing his speech. And maybe, for the first time, they noticed the empty chair where I should have been. But I wasn't there to witness it. I was here, choosing the horizon. The morning of Lydia's wedding dawned not with church bells or tense family calls, but with the sun climbing over the Aegean, spilling gold across the whitewashed terraces of Santorini. I woke to the sound of waves breaking gently against the cliffs, and the warmth of Adrian's hand resting on mine. Good morning, Mrs. To-be, he teased, pressing a kiss to my temple. I smiled, stretching against the sheets. Don't rush me. I'd like to enjoy the engagement before Lydia turns it into another contest. He laughed softly, and the sound blended with the ocean breeze, steady, sheer, the very opposite of the brittle laughter that usually filled my parents' home. We spent the morning wandering narrow cobblestone streets lined with blue-domed chapels and fragrant bakeries. Locals greeted us with warmth, their smiles untainted by judgment. At one cafe, the owner slid a plate of honey-drenched baklava between us with a wink. For love, he said, and Adrian raised his glass of chilled white wine in agreement. For hours, I forgot what day it was back home. I forgot that across an ocean my family was gathering, toasting Lydia, adjusting boutonnieres, and snapping photos carefully curated to exclude me. All I knew was the joy of the present. Sun on my shoulders, laughter echoing through narrow alleyways, Adrian's steady presence grounding me in a way no staged ceremony ever could. That afternoon, we joined a small group on a catamaran. The sails billowed, the sea glittered like a sheet of sapphire glass, and dolphins leapt alongside us, as if even nature was in on my rebellion. Sophie's texts buzzed occasionally on my phone, updates from the world I'd left behind. "You're trending by absence," she wrote. "People keep asking why you're not there." I stared at the message, then tucked the phone back into my bag. For once, I didn't need to defend myself. My silence spoke louder than their captions. When the sun began to set, Adrian and I stood at the bow, the horizon on fire with shades of crimson and gold. "This is what I want for us," he said quietly. "Not the noise, not the pretending, just truth, joy, and freedom." I leaned into him, the wind tangling my hair. For the first time in my life, I believe I deserve it. Back in the villa that evening, Sophie called me despite the time difference. Her voice was breathless. "Clara, you should see their faces. Lydia is glowing, but everyone's whispering about where you are. Someone showed me your Instagram story of the sailboat, you in that red dress, and half the bridesmaids nearly choked on their champagne." I laughed, the sound bubbling up like champagne itself. "So I did make it to the wedding, just not the way they planned." "Better," Sophie said. "You've outshone them without even stepping in the room." When the call ended, I stood on the balcony overlooking the sea. For the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten sister or the erased daughter. I felt like Clara Whitmore, seen, celebrated, alive. And somewhere, though I wasn't there to witness it, I knew Lydia felt the sting. Because nothing haunts more than the absence of someone you thought would beg to be included. The day after Lydia's wedding, I was sprawled on a sun-warmed terrace overlooking the caldera, a glass of chilled wine in my hand, and the sea stretched infinite before me. My phone buzzed again. Sophie, of course. She had become my unofficial messenger, carrying gossip from one world to the other. Her voice came fast, urgent. "Clara, you're not going to believe this." Lydia cried at her own reception. I blinked against the sunlight. "Why?" "Because people kept asking where you were. Some relatives even thought you were late. But when they realized you weren't coming at all, the questions started flying. Where's Clara? Did something happen? One aunt even asked your father if you'd had a falling out." Sophie paused, then chuckled. "Charles muttered something about you being busy with other plans." Everyone knew it was a lie. I sipped my wine, savoring the irony. For years, my absence had gone unnoticed. Now it was the loudest presence in the room. Later that afternoon, another message came, this time from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. "I don't know what happened, but it didn't feel right without you there. People were whispering. Lydia didn't look happy. Thought you should know." I set the phone aside and let the words settle. For once, the whispers weren't against me. They were for me. The narrative Lydia had tried to control, the drama-free day without her troublesome sister, was unraveling thread by thread. Adrian found me staring at the horizon, silent. "What's the news?" he asked. "They noticed," I said simply. "They finally noticed." His smile was steady. "Sure. That's the thing about shadows. Once you step out, everyone realizes how much you'd been holding together by being quiet." That evening, as we dined on fresh fish grilled with lemon and herbs, Sophie texted again. "Your mother cried when someone asked why there were no family photos." With both daughters, Lydia stormed off during the toast. "People are saying she looked more bitter than bride. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, what I felt was something deeper. Vindication, yes, but also release. Their regret wasn't my victory. My victory was right here. Adrian's hand warm over mine. The sea alive with starlight. Laughter spilling from tavernas down the cliffs. I leaned back and let the night embrace me. Lydia had her ballroom, her carefully arranged roses, her brittle smile. I had the horizon, the freedom of choice, and a love that never asked me to vanish. The whispers of regret drifting back across the ocean weren't my burden anymore. They were theirs to carry. By the time we returned from a day trip to the hot springs, my phone was crowded with notifications. I ignored most of them until Sophie's name lit up the screen. I answered, and her voice tumbled out in a rush. "Clara, Lydia lost it. Like, completely lost it." I sat on the edge of the villa's bed, towel still wrapped around my hair. "What happened?" "She broke down during the gift opening. Someone joked about how your present must be something extravagant, since you always think ahead." Lydia snapped. "She said you weren't invited, that you didn't deserve to be there, and when people stared, she started crying about how you make everything about you." Sophie's tone was part disbelief, part delight. "Clara, she unraveled in front of her entire guest list." I closed my eyes, picturing Lydia in her silk gown, the picture-perfect bride, crumbling because of the one person who wasn't even in the room. For years, I'd been invisible. Now my absence had become a mirror she couldn't escape. Later that evening, another message came from a relative I barely kept in touch with. "I'm sorry for how your family treats you. Everyone could see it today. Lydia didn't look like a bride. She looked like someone desperate to prove she'd won. But without you there, it didn't feel whole." Adrian watched me as I read the message, his brow furrowed. "How does it feel?" I thought about it. Truly thought. "Strange," I admitted. I always imagined that when Lydia finally broke, I'd feel triumphant. But I don't. I feel free. Like her crown finally cracked. And I don't need to wear the weight of her shadow anymore. He pulled me close, his voice low. "That's because your revenge isn't her downfall. It's your peace." That night, Sophie sent one last update. "Your dad left early. Your mom tried to smile through it, but people kept whispering." Lydia locked herself in the bridal suite for half the evening. Guests were saying it was the most uncomfortable wedding they'd ever been to. I set the phone aside and stepped onto the balcony. The sea below reflected the moon in silver shards, endless and untouchable. Lydia had her ballroom, her tears, her unraveling. I had the horizon, the laughter of strangers who became friends, the steady arms of a man who chose me without conditions. The cracks in her crown weren't mine to fix. They never had been. And as the wind swept my hair back, I knew. The throne Lydia fought so hard to keep was nothing but an empty chair. When Adrian and I returned home from Greece, our bags full of sand-dusted clothes, and our hearts lighter than they'd been in years, I knew something inside me had shifted for good. I had stepped out of the shadows, not by fighting for their light, but by creating my own. The messages continued for weeks, relatives hinting at Lydia's breakdown, cousins apologizing for the way they had turned a blind eye, even distant acquaintances confessing they'd always noticed how I was treated differently. Each note was a small vindication, proof that I hadn't been imagining the years of neglect. But I no longer needed those validations. One evening, sitting at the dining table with Adrian, Sophie, and a few close friends, I realized I finally had what I'd always craved. A table where my seat wasn't conditional. There was no competition here, no unspoken rule that I shrink to let someone else shine. There was only laughter, stories, clinking glasses, and love that didn't ask me to audition. Adrian raised his glass, his eyes warm and steady on mine. "To Clara," he said, who finally stopped chasing empty chairs and built a table of her own. The others echoed him, glasses lifted high. Tears pricked my eyes, but they weren't bitter. They were sweet, like sunlight after years of rain. Sometimes I still think of that gilded invitation with my name missing. It sits tucked away in a folder, not as a wound, but as a reminder. Exclusion can be a gift when it shows you who you truly are. Lydia tried to erase me from her wedding, but in doing so, she erased herself from my story. My parents still call occasionally, their voices brittle, carrying apologies that come too late. Lydia, I hear, is still posting carefully curated photos, still clinging to the illusion of perfection. But I don't follow. I don't need to. Because I've learned that true revenge isn't standing in the room where they once ignored you. True revenge is building a life so radiant, so filled with joy, that their shadows can never touch it. And that's exactly what I've done.